Hi, welcome to part 2 of 2 of lecture 2 for the second week. So in the last lesson we made a few distinctions, and we talked about meta variables and the distinction between an object language and a meta language, and we also talked about the distinction between mention versus use. So we're now going to make use of these distinctions when we're going to define more rigorously what counts as a sentence in our system SL, so in our symbolic language. Okay, so before, in the last lesson, we used this example, so we said that if P, and where the boldface here indicates that we're using a meta variable to indicate any arbitrary sentence at all in our system SL. So we said if P is a sentence in SL, then so is not P. So we're going to use this kind of language now to define more rigorously the language of SL. So just like in English, you have certain word constructions that count as a sentence and other constructions that don't. In other words, English has a particular kind of grammar. So a sentence like run, John, Paul, and slow. If we put quote marks around this is not a sentence in English. Notice again that I put the quote marks around it, right? Because I'm not using those words, I'm just mentioning them. Okay, so run, John, Paul, and slow is not a sentence in English. But if I say John and Paul run slow, that is a sentence in English. So there's certain rules, certain structures that have to be obeyed when you bring words together for them to count as a sentence. And similarly, that's the case in SL. So just as English has a grammar, and this is actually a natural grammar, right? This is one that you were never, strictly speaking, taught. You just sort of picked it up by yourself. So maybe we'll put in parentheses here that as a natural grammar here. That's natural. We have to give a grammar for our symbolic language as well, and we get to define it here. So we're just going to say that just as English has a grammar that may be natural, so we need to give a grammar for SL. And we're going to do that formally now. So the first thing we have to do is say what the vocabulary is, and then say what the grammar is. So, in other words, we have sentence letters in SL. And these sentence letters are any of our Roman letters, so like A, B, C, and if you're worried about us running out, we can always put little subscripts on there. And I don't think I can do that right here, but we'll let that be a short form for a subscript. That's A2. Then we can have A3. So you can imagine that these are little subscripts. So we can have an infinite number of different sentence letters at our disposal. Okay. That should be sentence letters. Now, that's our vocabulary. And then there's certain rules about how we're allowed to combine them. So we need to have a grammar. And the way we connect our sentence letters in SL are using our truth functional connectives. Truth functional connectives. So hopefully you remember, this is the tilde, the and, or, and the material conditional, which I've written as this, but you'll see it looks more like a horseshoe in the text, and then also the biconditional, which I've written like this, and in the text this looks like a triple bar. And just like in English, how English has punctuation marks, so a comma, for example, is a punctuation mark, but it's not a connective, strictly speaking. so we're going to have certain kinds of punctuation marks in SL as well. And our punctuation marks, in SL, these are going to be our parentheses. The left parenthesis and the right parenthesis. Okay, so now what we can do is actually rigorously define how to build up sentences in SL. And so what I'm going to do is basically go through what exactly how the text does it. And this is on page 70. So the first condition for building up a sentence or determining what counts as a sentence in SL is the following. Every sentence letter is a sentence. So A, B, C, or D, E, or A2, B17, each of these sentence letters is a sentence. The second now is if, notice that we're going to use boldface again here, right? So this boldface means that P is a meta variable. So you could replace P with A, B17, E, whatever you like. So if P is a sentence, then not P is a sentence. Right? So this is just saying if you've got a sentence in SL, you can throw a negation in front of it and you get a new sentence, but it counts as a sentence. If P and Q are sentences, then this boldface is going to take a little while. There we go. And P and Q is a sentence. So what we're saying here is if you have any two sentences, right? P, so not the particular sentence P, but any particular sentence of SL. So if you have two particular sentences, whatever they might be, then you can build a new sentence just like this. So left parentheses, the first sentence, ampersand, the second sentence, right parentheses. That will also count as a sentence. This is going to be similar to the case when we do it for disjunction. So if we say that if P and Q are sentences, then P or Q is also a sentence. So don't forget, not the particular sentence P, because P and Q here are meta variables, right? So any particular sentence that you pick for P and any particular sentence that you pick for Q, right? In SL, right? You can put those sentences together by using disjunction. So let me put that up there for you. Okay, and if P and Q are sentences, then there's one other way we can build it up by using our material conditional. And hopefully by now you're getting the idea that whenever you have two kinds of sentences, you can use our truth functional connectives to build a new sentence. So here we have, if P and Q are sentences, then you can form a new sentence by using biconditional. Okay, and then lastly, we say that nothing is a sentence unless it can be formed by repeated application of clauses 1 to 6. So the idea here now is we have this instruction recipe for building up sentences. And this is actually what's called an effective procedure. So we can think about it like this. A recipe, if you like, but this is an effective procedure for building sentences in SL. And the reason why we call it effective is because you could basically get a machine to do this. If you give it a sentence and another sentence, then it can construct a new sentence using the outer parentheses and disjunction in between the first two sentences. So there's nothing sort of unmechanical about this, right? We can get machines to do it, and we're going to use that fact later on. And so let me just, I guess, then end by making a point about some conventions that we will use. So when we have a sentence like A and C, notice that I haven't used the outside parentheses here. So one of the major conventions we use is that if the parentheses are on the outside, you're allowed to drop them. So outside parentheses can be dropped. So you can go from A and C to A and C. And I should put these quote marks in here because I'm actually mentioning these kinds of sentences. So that's one example. But notice that these always have to be on the outside. So you can't do that for negation A and C. This is not an acceptable dropping of convention. Dropping of the parentheses, sorry. Okay, and I guess one last thing to mention to close off this week's lessons. So far we've given a syntactic characterization of SL, i.e., we haven't actually interpreted the sentence letters. So what I mean is, we haven't actually looked at the meanings of what A is here, or what C is, right? All we've done in specifying the language of SL is given the syntactic rules. We haven't actually interpreted the sentence letters, right? We haven't cared about what they're actually about or what they mean. So when you do syntax, you're not doing any kind of interpretation, right? You don't care about the meanings of the symbols. So when you do you don't care about the meanings of sentence letters. But in the semantics, you in fact do. So that's the difference between syntax and semantics. In semantics, you care about you investigate the interpretation. Okay, and that's it.